For our penultimate session today, we have two presenters. I introduced Anna Vollema this morning, our CBHD research scholar, so you've already heard a little bit from her. I hope enough to know, and probably you've met her around the conference as well, but I hope you saw enough to know how truly blessed we are that God brings people like her here to CBHD and to Trinity. Her co-presenter will be Mihretu Guta, who teaches philosophy at both Biola University and Azusa Pacific University. He completed his PhD at Durham in the UK and has done a great deal of additional study and work in metaphysics, philosophy of mind, neuroscience, quantum physics, and more. So just casual topics that people are interested in. Dr. Guta is also a member of the CBHD Academy of Fellows, which we haven't really talked too much about here, but the Academy of Fellows is a gathering of scholars. We meet in person once a year. We have a listserv where we exchange articles and ideas and thoughts. But he's been a very involved and engaged fellow, and he has just published an edited volume, and by just published, I believe it was last Tuesday, just published an edited volume that in part springs from, this is not an academy publication, but it springs from the kind of networking that we hope will take place as part of the academy. It features chapters by Russell D. Silvestro, another Academy Fellow, Scott Ray, who is also in the Academy, and myself. I guess I'm on the executive committee of the Academy. And so it's this sort of networking that brings people together and can produce these sorts of volumes. And I just noticed this morning, if you're interested, the book is called Taking Persons Seriously, Where Philosophy and Bioethics Intersect. Taking Persons Seriously. I just noticed this morning that the Kindle version has dropped in price from the normal $49 to $9.99. So if you're into reading books on your gadgets, you might want to scoop that up. Taking Persons Seriously. This is exactly the kind of collaboration the Academy of Fellows is meant to foster. So congratulations to Mihretu on this publication, and thank you for taking up this project. As you will see, he is one of the most energetic people I have ever met. He brings an enthusiasm to his work and his teaching that is infectious, and I say that in a crowd with many doctors in it, infectious in all the best ways. Please welcome Anna and Mihretu.
Hello, everyone. We are extremely delighted to be here this evening, and we are super thankful for Matthew, Dr. Epinet, for inviting us to take up this challenge of introducing to you all in what ways technology can be an idol. So this is a very sensitive issue and very sensitive topic. And as a philosopher, I'm always careful not to beg a question. So begging a question is a serious fallacy in philosophy. So you always kind of look over your shoulder and how should we frame this debate and argument, because technology is just is part of us, right? So without technology, we cannot really accomplish, we cannot do almost anything, right? Technology is literally like oxygen for us these days, like we breathe it. So it's very tricky now for us to come up and say, oh, technology is an idol. So what? The conclusion is just to put it in a trash can and then what? So to go to primitive age, or, you see where I'm coming from. So I think we will do our very best to make a very strong argument how technology, under what condition, and what sense it can end up being an idol, and what is an idol. So Anna and we're writing a book on this very topic. So what we're going to present to you is a snippet, an overall idea, a broader picture of our big project. So because of, as you guys know, because of the constraints of time, we're not going to be able to dive into anything that we're going to say in a much deeper way, but we're going to kind of help you see the broader picture of what we're going to do. So our claim is not really to say that technology is not important, or we should dump it, and we shouldn't drive, we shouldn't fly on the plane, and the rest goes and goes. That's not what we're saying. But technology, like any other tool, is going to really carry with it a different kind of connotation and semantics. And that's exactly our claim, and we will really show you how that can really happen. Okay, here is the master argument that we're going to defend. So the master argument is constructed in what logicians say hypothetical syllogism. It's one of the rules of inferences in logic. Modus ponens, modus tollens, hypothetical syllogism, and the rest. It goes on and on and on and on. So here is a nice, neat, yummy kind of hypothetical syllogism, and it goes something like this. The first premise is this: if technology induces worldview commitments, then it is not merely a tool, okay? That's the first premise. And the second premise is if technology is not merely a tool, then it can be metaphysically or theologically loaded. If those two premises really are defensible, then the conclusion has to follow from those two premises, and the conclusion is as follows. If technology induces a worldview commitment, then it can be theologically and metaphysically loaded. For those of you who are fans of logic or symbolic logic, it goes something like this. If P, then Q. If Q, then R. If P, then R. Done. Very, very clear argument. The challenge that we're going to face is now how to sell this argument to you guys. That's really a very difficult part. Okay, so I'm going to break it down, and as you can notice that the premises are phrased like conditional statements. Therefore, they are not categorical statements. They are not, for example, declarative statements. Therefore, they are not asserting any state of affairs. They are not making any claim about anything. So they are simply conditional statements, and these conditional statements can only go through if they are justified under appropriate circumstance, okay? So the argument as it stands is literally flawless. There is no possible world where this argument is going to turn out to be fallacious or wrong. If you presuppose the two premises, then the conclusion must by necessity follow from those two conclusions. Therefore, here is the first outcome. The argument is valid. Yeah, are you happy? The argument is valid? Yes. Okay, the argument is valid. Well, so what? If I can say, for example, if let's say, if Anna and I write this book, let's say on Idol, and then if everyone likes it, okay, let me put it this way. If the moon is made up of American cheese, then everyone is going to be happy. The moon is made up of American cheese, therefore everyone is happy. Done. Valid argument. There's no problem with that argument. But is the moon made up of American cheese? What's the problem with the argument? Not logic, not the form. But everything is wrong with the premises. The moon is not made up of American cheese. But I can actually convince you that the moon is made up of literally American cheese. There is American cheese and the moon are cousins. The molecules that compose the moon are the very molecules that compose American cheese. Therefore, we can also go that route. For now, let's assume that the moon is not made up of American cheese. So the argument is not sound, but it's valid. But what we're looking for is not only looking for validity, we're going to look for soundness. Soundness has to do with the truth of the premises. That is exactly what we're going to do. We're going to defend that each of these premises are not only taken kind of as a whole, as an argument valid, they are actually true. If they are true, this is the outcome. Technology can end up being an idol. That's a huge undertaking, and that's exactly what we're going to do. Here are three aspects of the master argument. We're calling them complex triangulation relationships. The first angle is technology. The second angle is worldview. And the third angle is beliefs. These are integrated, and they interact with each other in complex ways, what we call multi-directional ways. So worldview influences technology, technology influences beliefs, beliefs influence worldview, worldview influences technology. It goes in every direction. So to say that technology is nothing but mere tool is literally kind of a Sunday school version of conception of technology. Technology is not neutral, and it cannot be neutral. It has never been neutral. It will never be neutral. So the neutrality of technology is highly questionable because technology comes with lots of metaphysical and theological baggages. So this evening, we're going to convince you, we hope we will, that technology, under certain circumstances, if it is used and practiced, and if we interact with technology in a certain way, yes, it can be an idol, taken from theological standpoint and taken from metaphysical standpoint. And now I'm going to leave it to Anna to come up here and help us kind of understand from theological standpoint what constitutes an idol. And then I will also come up after she is done with her talk and then convince you from technological standpoint and metaphysical standpoint how technologies that we all love can end up being idols in the palm of our hands. Anna, take it away.
Thank you. So, I'm going to try and prove that idolatry is not just about seeing a God beyond Yahweh, but that idolatry also involves a worldview commitment. So, to begin with, I'm going to give you the broad definition of worldview that I'll be working with. According to Coco Rivera, a given worldview is a set of beliefs that includes limiting statements and assumptions regarding what exists and what does not, in actuality or in principle. What objects or experiences are good or bad, and what objectives, behaviors, and relationships are desirable or undesirable. The text in this definition is highlighted in different colors to emphasize the three kinds of beliefs encompassed within a worldview. The pink text highlights descriptive or existential beliefs, or those that deal with matters of truth or falsehood. Mihretu will be discussing these kinds of beliefs much more thoroughly in his philosophical portion of the presentation. The blue text features evaluative beliefs, the determination of a belief as good or bad. Finally, the navy text denotes prescriptive or proscriptive beliefs regarding how one should or should not act. Further developing this robust understanding of a worldview, Coco Rivera suggests that worldviews have a dynamic relationship with both behavior and experience. In other words, my worldview determines my behavior, which directs an experience, and that experience informs my worldview. However, as you can see from the figure, each of these elements intersect with and inform each other. With our master argument detailed and with this understanding of a worldview established, I will now develop a biblical theology of idolatry by which we can explore the nature of our idolatry of technology. Biblical theology, as it is distinguished from systematic theology, contextualizes its theological development within individual books or within the overall flow of Scripture. Thus, for this project, I combed through the Old and New Testaments for passages on idolatry and sought to exegete them within their individual contexts, pulling representative passages for this lecture. In order to understand the nature of idolatry, we need to go back to the very beginning. We've seen this throughout many of these presentations. We need to explore the question of what it means to be human in relation to the divine. That humankind is created in the image and likeness of God is packed with meaning for understanding our telos as human beings. The term for image is the Hebrew term tselem. It's actually one of the terms used for idol within the Hebrew language. What does this tell us about the nature of humankind? An idol in the ancient Near East was a statue used to mediate the presence of a god within a land. The deity reigned through the statue, and one had access to the divine through it. Thus, that humanity was created in the image of God is to claim that we were created to represent God within creation. The fact that this term is paired with likeness, demut, has important implications. A Hebrew term meaning resemblance, the only other place it is paired with Salem is within the birth announcement of Seth as the image and likeness of Adam. Thus, Catherine McDowell asserts that a key aspect of humanity's creation is kinship with God. With all this in mind, I suggest a hierarchy of the theological approaches to understanding the Imago Dei. I find the relational view to be primary because it emphasizes the givenness of what constitutes the other two views. That God created humankind to be in relationship with him means he created us with the means to do so, substantive, and with the expectation that we will do so, functional. Indeed, the very fact that God created us with rationality is what enables us to love him with our whole mind and heart and soul. A reality that transforms us into his image to be the representatives we were created to be. However, that the relational element of this dynamic is emphasized necessitates that we receive it as givenness and respond via thankfulness. That's why that arrow on relationship on that figure is double-sided. It comes both ways. This has important implications for the nature of idolatry. Richard Lentz asserts that if we were created with this natural tendency to reflect, then we will do so even when we misdirect that reflection. Thus, idolatry, he states, stems out of the same liturgical impulse as worship of the true creator. Just as a mirror reflects, a broken mirror will reflect in its own broken way. I would add to Lentz's argument that the givenness of humankind's reflective qualities also qualifies the nature of idolatry. Whereas true worship and reflection is a reception of divine love, overflowing and abundant in goodness, idolatry is a half-baked, one-directional forcing of this reflective quality. An earthly object of our affection has no ability to give back to us other than what comes from us as it interacts with the said object of God's creation. Thus, as we'll see, the emphasis in these idolatry passages is on the tragedy of humanity being satisfied with so little. Now, stepping into the meat of the passages that explore idolatry, the 10 Commandments elaborate on this relationship and representation paradigm. The givenness of these commandments is evidenced both in the fact that God saves the people from slavery before he elucidates on their call to relationship and representation, and in the fact that he reveals himself to all the people as a God who speaks, a reality that the prophets return to often as a point of contrast with the mute idols that Israel worships. The commandments are anchored in the identity and work of God, and the response on the part of the people is one of relational responsiveness to God and representation of his love to the rest of humanity. This can be seen in the first 3 commandments delineating the love of God through reception of divine identity and action, prohibition of loving other gods, and prohibition of loving God how we desire. With the Sabbath exhortation acting as a hinge between love of God and representation of him, the final commandments detail love of neighbor. Here is the foundation of relationship and representation. Indeed, the New Testament affirms that the whole of the law hangs on love of God and love of neighbor. The golden calf incident reveals that God's love necessitates a certain kind of relationship. Indeed, in this incident, the people requested the creation of gods that would guide them. However, Aaron then declares a feast to Yahweh. This reveals that the idol represented a theological distortion of Yahweh. The people indeed were seeking to worship him through the golden calf, but not with the reception of his own love as primary. You see, an idol domesticized a god, as can be seen in these modern-day statues of Hindu gods Ganesha and Parvati. People brought gifts and food to a god through a statue in order to obtain favor. In other words, an idol was a way to control a god. Further, the Israelites likely saw Yahweh as part of a polytheistic divine council. This ignored the omnipotence and omniscience of God. Similar to how gods were conceived in the ancient Near East, Ganesha is the god of removing obstacles and the bringer of good luck. Parvati is the goddess of power, energy, motherhood, and love. Thus, these gods are finite, only able to perform certain tasks given that proper food and gifts have been brought. This neglects the reception of God's love as all-powerful, all-wise, all-knowing. Leviticus clarifies the necessity for a certain kind of representation. I'm sure you've heard the passage before, be holy. Why? Because I'm holy. Thus, the book introduces an increasing emphasis on the holiness of the people as a response to God's life. God is not concerned only with worship of him as a practice abstracted from one's everyday existence. Rather, in Leviticus, we can see God's concern for the kinds of sins that often pair with idolatry, child sacrifice, and prostitution. Further, the prohibition of idolatry is also couched in relational and social exhortations, delineating the Sabbath year for the land, the year of Jubilee, the kinsman redeemer for a poor man's land, providing for the poor in the community, and the kinsman redeemer for the enslaved poor. All of this is anchored in the reality that Yahweh is God alone, and Israel should serve him. In other words, the representation is anchored in relationship. Because idolatry is corruptive of these ideals, the law was meant to be a guide towards this reality of relationship and representation. This can be seen in Deuteronomy 4 as Moses prepares the Israelites for entering the foreign land. These lands filled with idols to tempt Israel. He asserts that the purpose of following these commandments is to imbue the Israelites with both wisdom and understanding, and such would be a witness to the people of the land. This is to be the evidence of God's unique presence with the people. Thus, the book of Deuteronomy assumes intermingling with foreign nations, but it assumes intermingling of a specific kind. However, Judges evidences the consequences of failing at this task. Instead of obedience to the law, which set the people apart as representatives of God, they loved the foreign practices and gods of these nations and forced a reflection of the work of their own hands and their fellow man. This led to an endless cycle of idolatry and repentance in the book of Judges, proving that, just as Yahweh had warned, if the people chose other than him, the very things that they had chosen would become their snare. Thus, by the end of the book of Judges, it is said that everyone did as they saw fit. They had chosen to reflect the work of their own hands, so they had nothing to get back but this very same thing. It is in the prophetic and poetic books that we see the real nature and consequences of such idolatry. By synthesizing the theology of these books, a pattern emerges of idolatry involving relationship and representation of earthly creations, which bears its own consequences, leading to fear, which leads to the more desperate pursuit of placing one's hope in earthly creations. The consequences of idolatry in these books are devastating. Isaiah focuses on human pride in things such as wealth, power, and military security, all things which will ultimately fail. Jeremiah states that idolaters are so fearful that they are like birds which fear a mere scarecrow, rather than the God who can enact real change. Habakkuk reflects on the world of violence, greed, discontentment, and restlessness that marks a world where human beings worship their own creations. And finally, Psalms asserts that just as the idol is, so the idolater will become mute, blind, deaf, and stagnant. All of this points to the reality that, as G.K. Beale points out, you become what you worship. However, it's important for us to understand the nature of worship in these passages. The emphasis is not on how idolaters have lifted such things as wooden statues or wealth to become gods. Rather, it's on the tragedy of a people who are satisfied with the work of their own hands when such a God has saved them, adopted them, and spoken to them. In other words, to say you become what you worship is really to say you become what you're satisfied with. As C.S. Lewis states, it would seem that our Lord finds our desires not too strong, but too weak. We are half-hearted creatures, fooling about with drink and sex and ambition when infinite joy is offered us, like an ignorant child who wants to go on making mud pies in a slum because he cannot imagine what is meant by the offer of a holiday at the sea. We are far too easily pleased. Progressing to the New Testament, Romans bridges this Old Testament theology of idolatry with much of the language used for it in the New. Paul here calls idolatry a consequence of distorted desires, and therefore God will give them up to their desires that have become their satisfaction. Here is the reality of a relationship with a God in which reception is primary. God is always the one who directs, who provides the love that binds the relationship and enables the representation. Several of these New Testament passages make explicit the primacy of the reception of God's love. For instance, in 1 Peter, with idolatry being a passion of the flesh, Since Christ suffered in the flesh, the believer is instructed to also suffer in the flesh. Thus, picking up and carrying one's own cross in imitation of Jesus, representation, is the freedom attained by being loved by God through Christ, relationship. How is one to suffer in the flesh, according to Peter? By being self-controlled, habitually temperate, and loving one another. Thus, Peter develops this idea that the desires inherent in idolatry are a natural tendency for human beings, a warning that we should heed even in our modern-day context. Indeed, in Galatians, idolatry is intensified as slavery to the flesh. As slavery to the flesh. So what is freedom in this context? Here, once again, freedom is achieved by the relational work of God. Freedom is being known by God in Christ. Notice how the emphasis is not on knowing God, it's about receiving the relational work already done by God so that one can be set free to be the representation of Christ in the world. How do you do that according to this passage? By walking in the fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, etc. In fact, such love is the corrective to idolatry in 1 Corinthians and Colossians. When exploring the issue of whether or not the Corinthians should eat food sacrificed to idols, Paul affirms that there are no true gods behind the idols, so the Corinthians need not fear the food. Yet, because knowledge puffs up, the focus of the Corinthians should not be on pridefully acting in accordance with this knowledge, but on the love of God and fellow believers. Therefore, if partaking damages one's conscience, or if it harms the conscience of another, one should abstain from eating it. Similarly, in Colossians, the corrective to the passions of the flesh is to put on the new self. What constitutes the old self? Such things as anger, rage, malice, slander, lust, sexual immorality, and greed, which is idolatry. Here is what has only been hinted at in other places: the reality that idolatry is not merely thinking another God exists besides Yahweh, but it is also an unhealthy love of such earthly creations as money, relationship at the expense of generosity, representation. So what is the new self? Being clothed in a renewal of the image of God, a hearkening back to Genesis 1, this new self an imitation of the image of Christ. The reception of such love results in representation through compassion, humility, forgiveness, gentleness, patience, and bearing with others, all of which are bound together by love. So with this biblical theology of idolatry developed, let's return to the question of whether or not idolatry incorporates a worldview shift. Indeed, if idolatry is a shift from reception of God's overabundant love to satisfaction with the work of our hands, and this one-way forced reflection offers nothing more than being shaped into the images of our lack of desire, then such satisfaction affects behavior, which affects experiences, which direct satisfaction with lesser and lesser things. Thus, idolatry indeed is not merely about the worship of a God other than Yahweh, but idolatry can emerge even in our worldview as such things as money and our responsibility, or not, to be generous with it. Here are some examples of the kinds of negative worldview shifts we saw happen in the idolatry portrayed in Scripture, according to each of the three kinds of beliefs described in Coco Rivera's thesis. For descriptive existential beliefs, we saw the Israelites trying to domesticize Yahweh in order to manipulate him according to their desires. Regarding evaluative beliefs, God's people found pride in wealth, power, and personal security, as opposed to trusting in the God who had saved them. Finally, for prescriptive beliefs, we saw that idolatry led to everyone doing as they saw fit, with no moral compass guiding towards self-controlled, temperate, and loving action. Thus, with this in mind, what are some ways that technology can be idolatrous? How has technology shifted our worldview? The most easily recognizable idolatry of technology can be found in the religions popping up around AI. The Way of the Future, started by Anthony Lewandowski, asserts AI as a super intelligence bound to surpass humankind in the near future. Since Lewandowski sees AI as omniscient, he says that we have no other option but to worship it as a god so that it looks favorably on us and treats us lovingly like pets. While such idolatry is easy to identify, what's important is to dissect Lewandowski's claims as his underlying beliefs regarding the divine. Lewandowski is satisfied with worshiping AI as a god because he sees the synthesis of mere information as the height of divine intellectual activity. He's satisfied with the omniscience of an intelligence that lacks wisdom, that is devoid of love, and which knows no other justice or righteousness than the one we program it with. We should heed a warning here. Will we be so satisfied with a God of our own making, a God that is blind, deaf, and dumb, and by our worship of it, we would become so as well? Another example of a worldview shift which evidences our idolatry of technology is the case of the Kenyan workers exploited in the development of ChatGPT. Because ChatGPT is the work of our own hands, it exhibited the same violent, abusive, and sexual tendencies that fill our internet space. In order to fix this issue, OpenAI paid Kenyan workers under $2 an hour to manually go through this abusive content in order to train the system to weed it out. Not only were the workers underpaid for such a task, but many were deeply traumatized by being exposed to such content on a regular basis. In fact, Sama, the organization that mediated the contract with OpenAI, ended the job 8 months early, a decision prompted by the extent of the traumatic exposure and by allegations of abusive working conditions. Such exploitation represents the idolization of wealth, personal comfort, and personal security, which marks much of our Western technological development. All of this occurred at the expense of love for our fellow human beings. In the exploration of how such interactive technologies as social media can be idolatrous, I have a story. I have a friend who was struggling in church with an issue that has become deeply politicized in our world today. She tried to pursue pastoral guidance, but was essentially rejected. She ended up leaving that church, and one of the pastors approached her later, wanting to reconcile their relationship. He apologized to her and confessed that he had been so consumed with social media that his mind was firing in sound bites, and he had neglected to think carefully and with nuance on this particular issue. He said that since he had quit social media, his relationship with God had grown exponentially, and he felt convicted about how he had handled the situation with her previously. But I have incredible respect for that pastor. I do not think social media is inherently idolatrous, but just as Paul instructed the Corinthian believers to place love above knowledge and how they react to the benign nature of food sacrificed to idols, he saw how it was inhibiting love of God and love of humanity, so he chose to love over allowing his mind to be satisfied with memes, status updates, and strings of 149 character count messages. It is holy discontentment at its finest. This brings me to my final point. While discussion of what technology we should or should not participate in is helpful and necessary, at the end of the day, let us heed a warning regarding how easily the desires of the flesh lead to relationship and representation of the technological work of our own hands. Let us practice self-control, temperance, putting away the old self, and actively putting on the new, which responds in imitation to the relational work of Christ, the perfection of the image of God for which we were created. Dr. Guta will now finish the presentation with a more philosophical dissection of these matters.
Okay, so we are going to start with the notion of a worldview. So Anna's presentation convinced us from theological standpoint what constitutes idolatry. So the reason why we are assuming that technology can be an idol, and some of the ways that it can be an idol, is because it really directs and shapes our worldview. It sets the tone how our worldviews actually make us conduct ourselves in a certain way. So technology, for example, is not simply a mere tool, but technology is being used to answer fundamental human questions, fundamental existential questions, fundamental philosophical questions, fundamental theological questions, and religious questions. And the reason why people are having such an amazing confidence in the power of technology in helping us tackle one of the most mind-bogglingly difficult existential questions that every human beings in every era of human history have asked. Now we are at a point where our savior and redeemer is technology, and technology will help us tackle these problems. Therefore, if technology can help us solve these problems, then technology is not going to be a mere tool, right? So here are some questions, for example. So if you think about worldview, worldview is a kind of a set of presuppositions that we can actually have and form consciously or unconsciously. For example, what kind of being I am? This is a kind of ontological question. And where did I come from in the first place? Origin question. Will I survive a physical death? Destiny question, for example. Is there a God? It's a metaphysical question. Where does the universe actually come from? Cosmologists, astronomers, theologians, philosophers, you name it, religious people have views about this question, right? And is it right or wrong? It's a normative question. Is knowledge actually possible? It's an epistemological question. What is knowledge? How can we attain knowledge? What justifies knowledge? What would it take to justify knowledge? These are important questions. So therefore, in order to have an upper hand in answering and tackling these sorts of questions, guess what? The most important thing that we have to depend on is technology. So if technology is something that will help us answer these kinds of questions, then we inevitably develop a sort of unique kind of relationship with technology. We will give a special attention to technology. We will treat technology in a different way. Technology actually pervades our system. So technology is going to be not only something like something that we depend on, it will be what I have said elsewhere in my other lectures, a mental crutch. Without it, we cannot actually move. So here are some key things that we need to kind of keep in mind. So the presuppositions are prior assumptions that we can bring to the table before we even construct any kind of argument. So these presuppositions actually pave the way for beliefs. But what are beliefs? Philosophers talk in two different ways, in multiple ways, but here are two wonderful ways that philosophers talk about beliefs. Some philosophers think that beliefs are nothing but dispositions. Dispositions are properties, or dispositions are ways that we behave. If I am disposed to believing something, then I will be disposed to behave in a certain way. So for some philosophers, beliefs do not have content. They simply make us behave in a certain way. Well, I'm sorry. Beliefs do have content. Therefore, the view that says that beliefs are nothing but dispositions is going to be a very, very unsatisfactory view. If you really settle for this view, B.F. Skinner, for example, behaviorism of the middle part of 20th century and so on, and people really developed a very strong view that we can't access other minds, we can't read human thoughts, desires, and intentions. All we have to settle for is for observable behavior, and observable behavior is everything that we have under our disposal to say that someone is believing XYZ. Therefore, behavior is the only thing we have to depend on. If we understand beliefs in terms of dispositions, I think we cannot really go too far in our journey. Well, the second more plausible and good view is going to be what we call propositional attitudes. Beliefs are propositional attitudes. What this means is when we believe XYZ, we take a certain attitude toward a certain proposition. And when we take a certain attitude toward a certain proposition, beliefs must necessarily have content. For example, if I believe that it will rain tomorrow, then there is a content to my belief. In light of that belief, I behave in a certain way, which means that I will be looking for my umbrella, or I will be looking for my raincoat, or something like that to keep myself dry. So beliefs are ways that we actually act in light of what the propositions are meant to us. So therefore, the best way to think about beliefs is in terms of taking them to be propositional attitudes. Philosophers use this kind of a weird phrase, I believe that P. That P is a variable. That P, whatever that you insert in place of P, is the content of belief. So beliefs are important things, but what does this mean in relation to our main talk? Here are some of important examples of some of the beliefs that we form as human beings. These are not only beliefs that only Christians actually form across the board. People ask questions like, what kind of being am I? There are a range of answers. Some people say we are nothing but neurons firing inside our brain. So we're brains, we're physical systems. We're not really unique in any sense. Some people say we're embodied beings. We have souls, we have bodies, and so on, and they work in sync, in harmony, in collaboration. Some people say we're essentially immaterial beings, and they tend to belittle the relevance of the body. So where did I come from? Range of answers. Will I survive physical death? Range of answers. Is there a God? Range of answers. Where does the universe come from? Range of answers. So there isn't a single answer that we can give here. Christians have their own answers for all of these questions, but since the questions are not only being asked by Christians, we have to be open enough to listen to other people, with respect to what kind of answers, these people have with respect to these kinds of questions. So these kinds of questions are completely asked in the world of technology. So the reason why technology can be tricky and it can lead us into kind of what we're calling idolatrous kind of worship is because technology is being used to answer these kinds of important fundamental questions. So here is one example. So the role of technology. Technology sets the tone for how central worldview questions are being pursued. So here are 3 test cases. 1, a strong artificial intelligence. 2, transhumanism. 3, virtual reality, which is becoming an extremely famous area these days. So let's look at each one of these examples very, very fast. So the test case for a strong artificial intelligence, the core assumption here is to simply prove that natural intelligence is the same thing as a kind of intelligence that computers seem to be displaying to us. In other words, it's an attempt to prove the superiority of digital machines to human beings. In doing so, establishing what we call ontological superiority. So people who defend a strong artificial intelligence or a strong AI, they, unlike people who defend weak AI is not controversial. Gadgets that we have accomplish what they accomplish because we've invented them for gadgets to accomplish what they accomplish. So there is no metaphysical or theological agenda attached to weak AI. A strong AI from the get-go simply begins its journey to prove that we are inferior to the gadgets that we invent. So therefore, our position should be displaced, and ontologically, gadgets are superior to us. For example, here is a prominent philosopher by the name Paul Churchland, who teaches at University of San Diego, very, very prominent. He phrases it like this: is it possible to construct and configure a purely physical device so that it will possess genuine, not artificial, genuine intelligence, the kind of intelligence that you and I have? Genuine intelligence. The conviction of the research program called artificial intelligence, by that he means a strong version of artificial intelligence, is that it is literally possible. So we have to aim for that. We have to aim to realize that goal. So what we're seeing here in the case of artificial intelligence is the displacement of human beings' status as specially created beings in the image of God. That kind of claim is not going to fly with people who defend this view. So the prediction is this: future digital machines will excel human beings in every single way. That's ontologically. But people call that singularity, right? Okay, they will become smarter and smarter. They will have us as their pets and so on. So I'm developing a mathematical model, which I cannot really go into detail here. It's a very simple model called n+1. Guess what? The n+1 is a very nice model because for every single step human beings take in making computers get complicated and complicated, guess what? We necessarily will be one step ahead to computers. They will never catch up with us, no matter how hard they try. So the n+1 model is a profoundly defensible model through mathematical rigorous argument. Let's say in math functions, the way they work, they take an input and magic happens in the black box, computation, output. For any given input, you have one output and so on. I don't think we have any different model as we speak where computers don't take input, magic happens, don't give output. There's nothing happens in the world of computer. Input, magic happens, computation, and output. Okay, so the point here is we are inferior to the gadgets that we invent. Transhumanism, people like Nick Bostrom, among many others, it's freedom from human biology. Human biology is defective, it is badly designed, not because these people believe in God, but it happens to be that it's just a bad design. So what we have to do now is we have to leave human biology behind. We have to be able to extract in a mind, upload it on an electronic gadget, and then guess what? Enjoy digital immortality. We have to defeat death. We have to defeat disease. We have to be invincible people in every sense of the term. So super intelligence, super longevity, super happiness, all these prefixes are very surprising. We human beings are having this kind of assumption we can actually bring these state of affairs to obtain through our own work. Keep that in your mind. So there is no need for supernatural power or a divine intervention. The goal is simply to make a sort of important ontological transition from being human beings to being post-human. One German writer whose book I was reading this over the past few weeks, he said, how will we figure out that we are in the post-human state? Like, we already extinct. If the transition literally happens in a literal sense, so we first extinct in a literal sense, and then the post-human state takes over. But how can we tell in that state that we were at some point in the past only human beings? How can we tell that? And I think that's a serious problem. So transhumanism simply is an attempt to upgrade ourselves through our own efforts and using the power of technology. So technology is going to save us, and technology is our redeemer. Here's another prominent philosopher, David Chalmers, who is a world-class thinker on the science of consciousness. And I happened to be with him at the University of Arizona not too long ago. He's a very nice person, extremely smart. And he wrote a book recently, and he wrote a couple of articles in the past, and he is defending virtual reality in ways that other people didn't defend in the past. So virtual reality was understood in the past, it's a kind of fictional stuff. If reality is virtual, it's not real, it's fictional, we can just fool ourselves, we can enjoy, the entities, the characters they do not exist, but we pretend as if they do exist. Well, David Chalmers is arguing these days, nope, hold your horses. Everything is real. There's no distinction between virtual reality and the reality that as we know it. And he says, why can't virtual reality be as real as the objects in front of me? Why can't that be true? We shouldn't treat virtual reality in a fictional sense. We shouldn't treat virtual reality in an as-if language. No, virtual reality is as real as the reality that we talk about. The building is real, I'm real, people around me are real. In that sense, virtual reality is also real. Here are four important propositions that he makes, and he defends all of those. Virtual objects really exist and are digital objects. Take that in a literal sense, not in a metaphorical sense, not in a fictional sense, in a literal sense. Okay. And events in virtual world are largely digital events, and they are really taking place. Okay? And experiences in virtual reality involve non-illusory perception of a digital world. A digital world is real. We're not talking about illusion here. We're talking about something real. And virtual experiences of digital world can be about as valuable as non-virtual experiences of a non-digital world. The idea here is a virtual reality, when you use the right kind of technology and find yourself in a virtual world, you can have a love affair in that world and everything. You shouldn't fool yourself. You shouldn't remind yourself, oh yeah, I'm kidding myself, No, nothing is real here, but I'm just pretend. No. Everything is real. Okay? Everything is real. So what is the implication of this? Idolatry. So let's kind of get some clarity on from philosophical standpoint as to what we mean by idolatry. And Anna did a fantastic job regarding that. So for the most part in the scriptures, idolatry is the worship of other gods by means of images. Okay, good. So if you take this characterization by Stephen Fall, I think we can make two key observations here. One is this: the phrase other gods is an unspecified phrase. Since it is an unspecified phrase, it can act like a variable. Okay, keep that in mind. The second one is images. Again, unspecified, it can behave like a variable. We all know from our training in math, variables mean nothing until we provide what? A specific value, right? So we have to replace variables. They are placeholders. So other gods, if it functions as a variable, the phrase can stand for anything. It can stand for your study, for your love, for anything. Okay. Anna mentioned about money and sexual immorality and so on and so forth. Wealth, anything can be an idol if it is misused. Image is the same thing. They can actually behave like a variable. The core question is this: what are the values of the terms other gods and images? What are the values? What are the correct values? What are the right values of these variables? We can answer that question after 2-3 minutes, but here is my characterization of the metaphysics of idolatry. The metaphysics of idolatry can be explained in what I call tripartite object analysis. Tripartite object analysis, we have human beings, the main actors, right? There are images in between. This is a means or representation or mechanism by which we do what we do, and there is, the destination, the gods, or the god or the gods. This is destination, object of worship, love, attention, and etc. The recipient may or may not be real, but we have to focus on these three aspects of the metaphysics of idolatry. What happens when we engage in idolatrous worship? And how can we actually tell whether we are engaging in idolatrous practices? That's what I'm going to help you see. So why is it that idolatry is problematic in the first place? Remind yourself one more time, there are three actors: human beings, images, and gods. The gods, or the god, that's the destination. Human beings send a message to the gods, but something is standing in between. Images. Interceptor is in between, right? There's a problem. So we're not going to have a kind of a good feeling about interceptor right there. An invited guest. We don't need that. So we don't want to have something that's in the middle. So here is my analysis. So why is it problematic? There are two reasons, dozens of reasons, but let me mention two. There is interference/intrusion phenomenon. The reason why idolatry is really dangerous and problematic is because of this phenomenon that I'm calling interference or intrusion phenomenon, okay? What this means is that a disruption of an engagement with the right object of focus, attention, allegiance, and love. So human beings are here, images are in between, the destination is there, the interference happens as a result of what is existing in between, which means images, this interceptor. So because of that, idolatry is really, really dangerous. For example, if money is standing between you and God, a red flag. If fame is standing between you and God, red flag. If education, self-promotion is standing between you and God, red flag, right? So images are variables. We can connect them with anything, any relevant item. That's why idolatry is problematic from theological standpoint again. Don't forget, we're approaching this problem from purely theological standpoint, philosophical standpoint. The second serious problem when it comes to idolatry is what I call object or objects swapping phenomenon. These are interrelated things. Object swapping phenomenon would mean you take the right object, replace it with the wrong object, replacing the creator by a creature, for example. This is a very, very serious situation in which Anna was trying to expose to us. So it is problematic from a theological point of view, and technology has got immense potential, not only potential, but actualized potential to really make things go in a wrong direction. Okay, detecting features of what I call techno-idolatry. Techno-idolatry, how can we detect that? Here is how it happens, by the way, in the world of technology. We begin with fascination of our own work. We treat our work as if we haven't invented them. Like it's sort of like, it's... Oh, okay, here, okay, sorry. We begin with fascination of our own handiwork. Okay, look the robots, look what they're doing, oh my goodness. As if like we didn't spend time in the lab and designing them and writing, algorithm and programs. We all of a sudden become, oh my goodness, I can't believe this. Oh, this is unbelievable. Well, it begins with that, okay? We distance ourselves from our own handiwork, okay, in the sense of treating the objects we've invented as if they are independent entities. Guess what? It's very subtle, it's very implicit, very progressive. It's incremental. So we start with fascination, we distance ourselves, okay, and then we treat our own work using a third-person language. Oh my goodness, I can't believe ChatGPT is now conscious. Oh my goodness. And then we pay special attention and focus to our own work. And that sets us for a very interesting outcome. We start attributing metaphysical properties to an object that has no referent. When people talk about computers, they, using pronouns, it, and so on, ask yourself, what are the reference of those pronouns? When I use first-person pronoun I, the referent of first-person pronoun I is this guy, this person. But what exactly is the referent of when we address computers by using plural pronoun, they, or it, or something like that? What exactly is it? We attribute metaphysical properties, something like conscious or proto-conscious or something like that. So this will lead us down the road of idolatry, and here is kind of my attempt of probably kind of trying to convince you of that. So let's take the first case of idolatry from the vantage point of a strong AI. A strong AI distances, like people who defend this view distance themselves from their own gadgets. I call this outward-focused idolatry. So you treat an object in a certain way as if the object has never been invented by you. Somehow the object descended from another universe. You treat it as if you have no connection to that object in the first place. So that's it, it's out there. You're consumed by it, and it's going to be superior to me. It's going to control me, and so on. So making invented objects the center of special attention. And here is a kind of a model, looking what blank are capable of doing. Look what these computers are capable of doing. And the second, I'm going to finish. And the second example is transhumanism. Transhumanism leads us to what I call reflexive idolatry, because we are upgrading ourselves. There is no God. We're on our own. It ends up leading us to what I call self-worship. And the last point is idolatry from virtual reality standpoint. It leads us to what we call fictional idolatry. We create attachment, we form beliefs, we form habit, and that literally turns into a worldview called a way of life. So I'm going to skip this, but this is the last two before I finish. That's it. So here is on the, what is on the horizon. Here is what's on the horizon. Moving forward, electronic doctors will serve us, electronic tutors, electronic lawyers, electronic office workers, electronic preachers and sermons will be common, electronic readers and writers, electronic musicians, electronic artists, electronic lovers, dog walkers, and so on. This is where we're heading. We have two stark choices. Either we serve technology. By serving technology, we will be taking a ministerial position, or we will be served by technology, which means that we control technology, not the other way around. That's magisterial position. And I think it's up to us. Lastly, here is a master argument. If technology induces a worldview commitment, then it's not merely a tool. If technology is not merely a tool, it can be theologically loaded. Therefore, if technology induces a worldview commitment, it can be metaphysically loaded. This argument not only valid, I think if the reasons we've presented are true, it is also sound. That's it. You have no choice.